Yeah, we just. So I mean, like, this way.
Our real issue is too big. This does not act like, this is what they're like.
No. No, yeah. That's gonna be bad thing about this thing. Yeah.
You can't do this. It doesn't work.
That's it. And.
Okay, like I print out all the time. Like.
I know. That'd be good. That'd be good. Thank you.
Like he got it, he's got it up on the mic. Yeah. His presentation, no audio, no.
Good.
Invite my students.
Faculty that's assigned each year.
You got there.
I got a few extra hours,
I was
so.
gonna say, yeah. we
Gotta get out of this guy too.
But no, how creative.
Ah.
Behind the scenes over organizing some.
Somebody, put it on my, should,
Yeah.
Because apparently now, everything's gonna be out there.
Union, or they're doing a share. Union say. No, where you're like, well, I do. It's classic, it's like a right there.
I get anything about that.
Yeah.
All right, how are you?
Thank you very much, Austin. Thank you, KEXP. We are Ozo Motley from Los Angeles.
Hello, everyone. We just want to let you know the reception is going to be after the lecture. So if you see anybody accidentally sneak and grab food before, that does not mean it's open. It's just that we couldn't stop them once we're already in motion. Okay? Thank you.
Yo soy derecho y no supiera lo que te quiero. Tengo dos mis ojos. Digo, basta del mundo.
If everyone wants to take their seat, we are about to get started soon.
Okay, welcome everyone. good energy, great soundtrack, some Maná, I love it. All right, so good afternoon. My name is Jo Scott Coe. I'm professor of English and president of RCC Academic Senate. And it's my honor and privilege to welcome you today to the RCCD 63rd Distinguished Faculty Lecture and the conversation that will be presented with by our colleague and friend, Dr. Eddie Perez. So let's give him a round of applause first. You may or may not know that this recognition began in 1961, and it is bestowed annually by each college, by the Academic Senate, and it's one of the highest honors that faculty can bestow on our colleagues. Dr. Perez is an associate professor of sociology here, where he is also co-chair and senator for the Department of Behavioral Sciences, as well as faculty co-chair of RCC's Latinx Association. His academic journey offers a powerful testimony of perseverance, curiosity, and the desire to grow. Dr. Perez grew up in Placentia, where he followed a non-traditional pathway to complete his AA at Fullerton College without a high school diploma. At Cal State Fullerton, he took classes as a working, married parent student. He began his studies in visual art and graphic design, but eventually chose sociology as a field after inspiring conversations with a mentor. Dr. Perez went on to achieve a BA and an MA in sociology, followed by a doctorate in education. Technically, I dropped out, he said in a recent interview on the RCC School of Business podcast, but I never quit school. Before achieving tenure at RCC, Dr. Perez worked as a substitute teacher in K-12 and taught part-time at RCC, Chaffey College, and Fullerton College too. Over the years, he has learned to care for his mental health through exercise and meditation, as well as hiking. He is also an accomplished guitarist and harmonica player. One of his favorite words is persistence. In a moment when academic freedom and higher education are under assault across our country, it could not be more urgent or relevant to celebrate faculty inquiry, research, and innovation to engage critical subjects of our time. So this afternoon, we are so grateful that Dr. Perez will share some of his work with us on this last stop of his distinguished faculty lecture tour. So please join me in welcoming him to the microphone.
All right. Is my mic on? Is everybody hearing me okay? All right, perfect. Welcome, everybody. I want to start out by offering a couple thank yous real quick. I'd like to thank Leslie, first of all, Leslie Vargas, for her hard work and efforts for putting all this together, not only at this campus, but at Norco campus and also Moreno Valley. She's been a great help, and she's been super kind and patient with me throughout this process. I'd like to thank Ajane Wilkinson, my brother out there. Thank you for nominating me, for trusting me with this honor. I value your friendship, the love, the inspiration that you provide for me, the mentorship. Thank you, Ajane, for this opportunity to put me in the spot. I'd like to thank the Academic Senate for also entrusting me with this lecture. I know that it's a huge honor and it's a big responsibility, so I appreciate that you all are allowing me to come up here and actually do this lecture for you. And I hope to inspire you and actually offer some words of encouragement and wisdom. Sally Ellis, she's in here. She's the librarian here at RCC. She's been super helpful in helping me track down articles, navigate our library. Sometimes that's not always the easiest place to find things. So she's been super helpful in actually guiding me with tracking down information for my project here. I'd like to thank Dr. Estrella Romero. She's over at Norco, but she's one of our colleagues that was here as well. She offered me some guidance, some feedback, and I'd also like to offer some thanks to Cliff and Dr. Chris Acevedo, who also provided guidance and information and feedback for my work that we're doing here today. I'd like to thank Ben Vargas and Lily Acevedo for doing daily check-ins with me. Making sure that I'm on task, making sure that I'm ready to go, making sure I needed what I need. Ben was super helpful and actually drove me to my other previous lectures to make sure that I got there okay. So thank you, Ben. Thank you for that. I also would like to thank my wife for listening and listening to my topic over and over again, having to go through the process of me kind of throwing things at her to see what sounds good, what doesn't sound good. And, you know, she was pretty patient with me, and she sat there and she listened, and she did it with a smile. So thank you, baby. My siblings, I wish they were able to be here, but unfortunately they're not able to be here, but I think they're on the Zoom, as well as the rest of my family back in Texas. So shout out to my Tejano relatives out there. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So my topic today is From Strain to Strength, Rethinking Masculinity and Emotional Expressions. And a bit of a trigger warning. I am going to talk a little bit about violence, some suicide, mass shootings, things of that nature. So if these topics are a little bit triggering for you, please take a moment to go outside, you know, do a little self-help for yourself, self-care. But just, you know, wanted to throw that out there that I am going to be talking about some sensitive topics in this discussion. So that's my trigger alert for you. All right, so to start this out, when I was a kid, first of all, that resembles me. I found that image. And I thought, this is a classic. I have to put this on there. It's like, this is great. So my mom would call me corajudo when I was little, because I was always grumpy. I was just like a grouch, you know. I was just always upset about something. So I was just kind of wandering the house, and I have like a little attitude, I guess. And so she, that's corajudo, you know. You're like, what's wrong with you? And it was funny because I was a kid. I was little when she would call me this. And as I got older, she kept calling me corajudo. And it was like when my mom passed away back in 2019, and then she was still calling me corajudo back even in 2019. So it's something that I kind of dealt with throughout my life. And corajudo means like you're a grouch, you're a grump. You know, you're always angry about something, right? And so I've always been kind of upset, angry, and never really understood why I was like that. It's like a moody person. I remember watching that movie Twins, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, and Danny DeVito described me perfectly. He goes, man, I'm moody in the morning, I'm grouchy in the afternoon, I'm crabby at night. And I go, man, that's just like me. It's like, not alone, right? So that's how I kind of experienced most of my life. It's like I never really understood why. Until recently, actually, just recently, when I started to do some self-discovery and kind of learn some things. And so when I had this opportunity to come do this lecture, I thought this was a great opportunity to actually share some of the things that I've learned about not only myself, but masculinity in general. And so I thought this was a great opportunity, and this is why I kind of jumped at this, this opportunity to actually do this lecture. So when Ajane first approached me about doing it, I first said no. I wasn't interested. I didn't think I wanted the extra stress, but then I go, no, this is actually probably a good opportunity to go out there and really explore this topic a little bit more, and actually force me to kind of get into the weeds and kind of learn a little bit more about myself and also masculinity in general. So a couple of things. When we're talking about masculinity, some of the areas that I want to touch on is like mental health, violence, and substance abuse, employment. These are the areas that I'm kind of focusing in on. Now, there's a lot of areas that I could have focused in on, but I picked these. One, you know, mental health, violence is, you know, I'm a sociologist and I teach criminology, and these are the topics that kind of get my students kind of going in a funny kind of way, which is kind of odd, but it's like, you know, it offers a little bit of excitement, I guess, in a sense, right? It's a little bit more exciting than just talking about education and some of the other things that we talk about on a day-to-day basis. Now, I know here on campus, a lot of our conversations usually focus on education and the educational gaps that we experience. And that could have easily been included in these topics as well, but I chose to touch on these particular areas instead. So when we're thinking about mental health, women are more likely to report mental health issues. They're about 1.5 to 2 times more likely to report issues with mental health. Men typically don't like to report issues with mental. They don't like to say that they're depressed. They don't like to say that they're feeling anxious or upset about things, right? We kind of tend to hold those sorts of things in. And that could be problematic. And again, it leads to unhealthy outcomes like substance abuse. A lot of times when people are feeling depressed or anxious or grappling with troubles, personal struggles, they tend to go to coping skills that are drinking more, smoking, drugs, alcohol, online gaming, other kind of outlets that are not necessarily healthy, right? So these are some of the things that men typically navigate to, which compounds the problems. If you're drinking because you're experiencing depression, where you're more likely to be depressed because of the drinking, right? Because it's like, it causes depression. But then you're depressed, and so the way you self-soothe is you drink more, so it becomes secular, right? And so it's problematic in and of itself. Also, if we're thinking about suicide rates, and this was really alarming when I first discovered this, 80% of the suicides that happen out there are men. That's a huge number. When you think about it, 80% of men, or 80% of the suicides are males. Now, and 50% of those suicides are with a firearm. So not only are they ending their lives more, but they're also choosing to end their life in a violent way, right? So this is a kind of a thing that really kind of just opened my eyes, like thinking about this type of a problem, and also thinking about like, why aren't we talking about this a little bit more? If we were looking at any other population out there, if we were looking at, race, a demographic like race or ethnicity, right? And we knew that 80% of that population was committing suicides, we'd be looking for interventions. We'd be talking about it. We'd have programs. We'd be developing policies. We'd be doing something out there to kind of target that particular group so that we could figure out what's going on. Yet, I've been teaching for a while, and we hear about suicide, we hear about these sorts of things, but like, how often do we hear that 80% of the suicides are male? We don't really hear about that that number, and which is kind of surprising to me. So it's a problem for me because there's really not a whole lot of awareness. And so, one area. Now let's think about unemployment. Males typically are more likely to be unemployed than women, with the exception of Hispanic men. Hispanic men were males have jobs more at greater rates than their female counterparts. And when I get into the unemployment, there's a variety of different reasons why we might be unemployed. It could be job skills. It could be the place where employment opportunities are offered, right? It could be the case that there's mental health issues, and actually in this never married category over here, which is never married category, the age is between 24 and 54, right? That's the prime age working adults, right? And again, we can see that the men are more likely to be unemployed. And so this could be like those kids, the younger population, that they might be like a failure to launch, they're at home, maybe they're gaming, they're doing something, but they're not working, right? They're not working. And in this report that I pulled in this never married population, there was two things that they outlined as being the biggest reasons as to why they weren't employed. One, they lacked the skill sets. They didn't have the job skill sets to be employed. And also, two, they claimed that mental health or some sort of physical health or disability was preventing them from being employed. So we had these two categories. But again, in 1950, 98% of the working age adults were employed. Today, it's 89%. So now we have a bigger gap. The gap is kind of increased. So now we have more people that aren't working. So I'm going to get into the employment in a second, but one of the things I wanted to pay attention here, or I want us to pay attention to, is thinking about the reasons why we're losing jobs, right? When we look at the job market, we'll think about the skill sets, because that was one of the reasons that they said that they're not really working, is because they don't really have the skill sets that they need to be employed. And so again, this is problematic. Homelessness, 770,000 people homeless on any given night, right? And that's the population, 60% are male, and we have about 39% of the homeless are female, 1%, about 1.2% is transgender, right? So again, greater portion of the population experiencing homeless are men. So we could also associate homelessness with mental health issues, the cost of housing, job opportunities. Again, all these things kind of relate. They all work together. And there's not any one factor that's going to be the predictor, but I think when I started looking at this topic, when I started really paying attention to what was happening, I started kind of seeing a little bit of a pattern. And there is something that I think that is underlying a lot of the problems, and it resides within masculinity, right? It's within our ideas and our gender norms of masculinity. So greater population. So again, this is homeless, mental health, and violence. These are kind of like big items that kind of they kind of raise this alarm, and it's really dramatic. But again, we could look at other little things too, like education and divorce rates, family, raising families and those sorts of things. So for violence, 90%, so here's a saying that I just recently heard. Not all men are violent, but most of the violence is done by men. 90% of the homicides are male perpetrators. 77% of violent crimes are male perpetrators. The prison population, 93% of the prison population are men, 5% are women, right? So there's a huge disparity in terms of violent crimes and who's committing these crimes. So when I was looking at these sorts of things, and again, right here, firearms, 73% of murders involve firearms. Murder rates, men commit murder 7.5 times more than women, right? 36 times more likely to commit rape or some sort of sexual assault compared to their female counterpart. Road rage is an interesting one. 60.5 of people out there experience some sort of road rage, which road rage is also highly perpetrated by men. That's something that tends to happen. As a matter of fact, I was reading a report by Auto Club, and Auto Club noted that over 50% of fatalities on the road are actually caused by aggressive driving, which the most serious form of aggressive driving is road rage. So it's a huge problem, and I'll talk about a couple of cases in a minute. So these are, again, more dramatic type of alarms that I'm kind of throwing out at you just to kind of give you like a visual picture of what's happening and what I think I see is going on, right? So for me, when I was trying to really make sense of what was happening, and it was really kind of started out with the conversation that I was having with a good friend of mine. What's going on with the boys today? What's going on with men? They're not going to school, they're not working, he's complaining. And this is like a dear friend of mine. He's pretty conservative, he's old Italian, and he's like, why do we have to have gender studies? But at the same time, why is anybody looking at men? I go, do you want gender studies or do you not want gender studies? Like, you got to make up your mind, right? Like, what is it? What is it that you want to do here? So he started asking these questions, and I'm going, well, and I just remember my answer was, well, they're not keeping up with the changes. They're not keeping up with the changes. And so I started kind of thinking about this idea of change. And before I got to these three individuals for the framework, I was just kind of pulling from my sociology in general. I started thinking about Emil Durkheim and his concept of anomie. Anomie is this kind of the state of normlessness, like where there's kind of a chaotic period. And one of the ways I like to describe anomie, and I do this for my students all the time, I go, if we think about recently when we went through COVID, when we were going through COVID, we had stay-at-home orders. We started working from home. We had to transition to online education and platforms, right? Parents were having to educate their kids at home, right? So things were changing really fast, and we started noticing things that were happening out within the communities. We started noticing that, people were fighting over masks. People were, buying all the toilet paper off the shelves. And we started, things just were disappearing off the shelves, and it was really chaotic. We didn't have a sense of norm, and it was really kind of this chaos. And so with Durkheim, he's an old sociologist, one of the founding members of sociology. He says, when we move from a traditional way of doing things to a more modern way of doing things, if we transition too fast, we're not going to have those set norms in place. People tend to self-destruct, right? They self-destruct. And so this was kind of the beginning of where I was thinking, like, okay, well, gender norms are changing really fast, right? If we think about gender norms over the last 50 years, we've changed really quite a bit. Conversations up until recently, people are still going, why do we have to have pronouns? What is all that about? And people don't understand why we're changing pronouns. People don't understand, that people can transition, thinking about gender as a construct rather than an identity, right? Gender is a construct and it's separate from sex, and it's also separate from sexuality. And so my thought was, okay, well, men aren't adjusting in the same ways that women are adjusting. Women are keeping up with the transition, but for some reason or another, men aren't keeping up with that transition. So what's going on? So then I started kind of pulling from my criminology, and I started tacking on to Robert Merton. Robert Merton's, and he kind of branches off of Durkheim's ideas of anomie, this concept of chaos, but he calls it strain. And so I started thinking about this idea of strain, and we'll talk a little bit more about his contribution, but I kept kind of going down this little road. I went from Robert Merton to, I picked up on Robert Agnew's general strain theory, and then I found Joseph Pleck, who was actually looking at gender norms and strain, right? And so I started searching, and I found this researcher, a criminological researcher, Amanda Fontaine, And she was actually already starting to integrate Joseph Pleck and Robert Agnews' ideas of strain. So let me just kind of quickly go through these so that you can see how like we're framing our thoughts, because as sociologists, that's what we like to do. We like to complicate things. You know, we frame it. We have to be, you know, do this and that just to be able to kind of explain what's going on. And so it can get really cumbersome and chaotic, but I'll do my best to kind of keep it as simple as I can. Agnew strain theory. So if we think about strain as something that happens, something that happens that people experience, right? And that tension that's created by this particular experience, by this. It can be a negative experience, like loss of job, you know, family breakup, things of that nature, income. And then we could think of how you internalize it. That'll be the second part of the strain. And then we can think about how people respond to it. And that's where we get to Robert Merton. So this is what I'm thinking about. What's happening, how we internalize, and how we respond to strain. And a strain, again, could be anything that you experience, like job loss, loss of family. It could be a breakup of going through a divorce, right? It could be, you know, violence in and around the home, growing up in a rough neighborhood, right? All these sorts of strains. So for Robert Agnew, he's looking at access to goals, right? So we have particular goals that are set. Let's say we're talking about the American dream, for example, right? We're trying to achieve the American dream, but if you have limited access to those goals, and you also have loss of value stimuli, right? Like you know, positive jobs, good education, housing, then you're more likely to experience strain, right? And also if there's exposure to negative stimuli, like there's drugs or alcohol around the house, if you're growing up in an area where drugs and alcohol are regularly used to deal with your problems and that sort of thing, right? If you grow up in a rough neighborhood. So he's looking at the thing that happens to you, right? Don't hit that goal. Your response, negative stimuli, right? Or your exposure to negative stimuli. So these are the kind of the elements I'm thinking about, like what happens to an individual. For Joseph Pleck, he's thinking about like, well, how do you internalize that? Now he comes up with 3 different types of strain. He comes up with discrepancy strain, dysfunctional strain, and trauma strain. Discrepancy strain, and this is really kind of centered on gender itself. So if you don't meet the goal, right? And if we think about the goal now being achieving these ideals of masculinity, being the provider, the breadwinner, being, you know, top dog in the house, whatever that looks like for some families, right? In traditional family structures. If you fail to meet those ideals, then you experience what he called discrepancy strain, right? Men experience strain when they fail to meet masculine norms. But he also says it's kind of like a catch-22, because if you do meet that norm or satisfy that norm, now it's dysfunctional, because now you satisfy that gender norm. When if we think about masculinity, we're not allowed to show our emotions. We have to be stoic. We have to be the breadwinners. We got the responsibility to maintain the house. We have extra pressure, right? So for him, if you didn't meet it, you experience strain. If you met the goal, you also experience strain. Now, if you grow up in certain families or certain areas, he also says that you could experience what he called traumatic strain. Traumatic strain is when you fail to meet the value goal of masculinity and you're punished for it. So if you grew up in a traditional home where you did something that wasn't, you know, masculine, or say, for example, you were a kid and your dad caught you playing with the Barbie doll, you got in a lot of trouble, right? You got punished for it. And if you got punished, he called that traumatic. If you were perceived as being weak, you got beat up. You got bullied around the house, or you got bullied around the neighborhood. Now, I grew up in an area that, and I shared this, one of the first time that I did this presentation, I shared this little story. It's when I was a kid, I was like, you know, 9th grade, I was going into high school. I had the senior that wanted to kick my ass. I'm like, man, I was a little guy then. I was kind of thin. And so I got this senior who's a varsity football player wanting to beat me up. Now, I came up in conversation around the neighborhood with my friends, and I had an older neighbor, and he goes, what? Somebody wants to beat you up? He goes, no, you're gonna go over there and you're gonna kick his ass. If you don't kick his ass, I'm gonna kick his ass. Then I'm gonna kick your ass for not kicking his ass, right? And so when you think about that type of, you know, neighborhood, if you grew up in a neighborhood that's like that, it's like if you don't show up, if you don't present as masculine, if you don't get in that fight, if you don't get in trouble, you're going to be in more trouble. So you experience that strain, and that can be very traumatic. The fact that I raise this example and I bring it up, it's because like I'm 55 years old and I still remember that, right? I still remember that. So if we think about your peers, your brothers, your cousins, and people that that reinforce those gender norms, how did they do it? Did they do it in such a way that it maybe it traumatize you in a certain kind of way? Or you still think about it and you still, do you kind of it kind of puts you at bay when you start thinking about like, wow, I had to do all that. I had to show up. I had to, maintain that whether you wanted to or not. And that's kind of the paradox. And if you think about that, and when I get to Robert Merton, there's a bit of a paradox because, again, if you conform, whether you believe it or not, whether you buy into those gender norms, it can be problematic. So these are the things that as you internalize these problems or these sorts of strains that, this is how you're responding. So what I took from Robert Merton is he's got some typologies, and I liked his typologies. I thought they work really well. And so when I was looking at the other researcher, Fontaine's work, and she didn't really use Robert Merton, but she was kind of integrating Joseph Pleck and Robert Agnew's ideas. The framework was there, but I like this because now you can kind of put a handle on the type of person that you are, or in a moment. And I think what's important to kind of highlight here is that no one of us is going to actually be in one of these categories all the time. We're going to kind of drift around depending on the context, whether it's family, whether it's your work experience, and whether you're hanging out with your family or your friends. You're going to be slightly different. But we want to keep in mind that there's a goal of achieving that ideal masculinity and how you respond to it, how you internalize it, how you respond to it. Now, if you think of innovators, the type of, like, I'm going to give you some models here. So if you think of an innovator, say they accept the ideas of masculinity. Not only do they accept masculinity, but they double down on it too, right? So much so that they're going to overdo it. Think about hypermasculinity or think about toxic masculinity. Those are the ideas that come to mind. So in other words, if their masculinity is called into question, they're going to lash out in some sort of violent or some sort of aggressive way. So they're looking at aggression, they're looking at violence, and they're looking at other means to kind of reinforce their masculinity, not in a healthy way, right? Those are the folks that I would call innovators. Ritualists, a second ago I said there's kind of that paradox where you may not buy into the goals or the masculine model, but you're going to go along with it anyways because you have to. Like I said, you had to go along with the program growing up. Somebody that maybe they don't really buy into violence, but they know if they don't fight as a kid, that it's going to be even worse. So they go along with it anyways. That's a ritualist, right? So they may not like the model. They may, what, that's just how I was brought up. It's tradition. Maybe it's the division of labor in the home. Maybe it's the way that you work with your partner, your wife, or the way you manage your kids. You don't buy into it, but because of traditional ways of viewing and thinking about it, that's what you do anyways. You just basically go along with the program. That's a ritualist. Retreatists are those that just kind of drop out. So the ones that, what, I'm never going to land that job. I'm not going to get that education. I'm just going to kind of give up. And they're the ones that are just kind of like checking out. They're the ones that 24 to 54 prime working age, the ones that aren't doing anything, that are kind of failures to launch. They're at home in mom and dad's basement vaping and playing video games. Those are the retreatists. They're engaged in drugs and alcohol. They might be online gaming. It could be online porn. Huge population out there engaged in online porn, right? Online gambling. There's some sort of addiction. But what they've done is they checked out. In other words, they rejected that masculine model and they rejected the means to actually do it, and they're going to go do something else. That's, again, unhealthy. And so when we think about the retreatists, if they're engaged in some sort of activity that's causing them to kind of engage in some sort of addiction or something like that, it could lead to that homelessness that we were talking about, or it could lead to unemployment because they're not really out there seeking the jobs. If we think about our education, if we look at our numbers now, Brandon sent me some numbers the other day, and I was looking at the differences between our males and female students. Our female population is way higher than our male students. Where are the male students? A second ago, I said students they're not getting jobs because they lack the skill sets, yet they're not here at school either. So that's problematic, right? So this is what we're thinking about. So when we think about retreat, think about the ones who just aren't showing up and they've left. A conformist, this is not a bad place to be. You buy into masculine norms, right? You kind of go along with the program, but in a healthy way. In other words, you're not doubling down. You're not being aggressive toward your partner. You're not beating anybody up. You're just kind of going through the motions of masculinity, but you buy into it also too. Now, I would say out of all these, the goal is to kind of get to this position of evolutionists, and I'll talk about them in a second, but really nothing wrong with being a conformist, but also know this, when you conform, whether you're having problems, and again, not with aggression or that sort of thing, but we also know that men are more likely to have heart disease, more likely to be under stress, more likely to die at an earlier age, more likely to get jobs and be around chemicals on the road, work heavy machinery, all these other things that kind of go along with that traditional masculinity they experience. So there are some consequences, whether we want to recognize them or not. But I mean, it's okay. People can be here and they can still be healthy. They can still have healthy relationships, healthy lives. But the best population or the best model that I can see is this one that I call evolutionists. If you think about an evolutionist, these are the ones that are flexible, that are adapting to the new and modern ways of being masculine, right? So these are the people that are like, hey, you know what? I can be a stay-at-home dad. I can be a contributor and rather than the breadwinner, right? And there's other ways of being masculine rather than just my status, my material possessions, or my positions of power, right? So Merton's typologies kind of helped me to kind of think about who's doing what and how we can classify them. Now, I also want to think about intersectionality. And I was reading me some bell hooks the other day. I like bell hooks. And she's thinking about, well, masculinity's got problems. If you think about Black men, for example, they got double problems. They got double barriers because one, they're trying to achieve that level of masculinity, yet within society, there's all these roadblocks. We have all these obstacles we put in their way. Michelle Alexander writes in her book about the new Jim Crow that, you know, kids are more likely to get stopped, frisked for possession, little things like that when they're young men of color, right? If we think about our school experiences, right? A boy is twice as likely to get suspended or expelled from school for the same behavior as a girl. A Black boy is 5 times more likely to get suspended or expelled from school, right? And we know that there's a school to prison pipeline that exists, right? You get labeled as a convict or a felon because you got stopped and frisked for some bullshit crime or whatever, right? If you get the status of a felon, now you could be legally discriminated for housing, for education, for student loans, right? For employment. Those are things that could be part of your parole, your obligation to be employed, educated, or have a job, right? And have residence. But we throw these obstacles out in front of you. So now it's much more challenging for you to be that breadwinner. It's more challenging for you to get that job and be in that position and kind of reinforce your ideal of what masculinity looks like. So there's an added layer of problems that exist. And bell hooks also is critical about the whole idea of traditional masculinity and kind of forcing that emotional suppression to begin with, right? Because that's part of the bigger problem that we're going to be talking about here today anyways. If we're thinking about how we don't show our emotions. We don't really recognize our emotions. We can't even name our emotions in a lot of cases. So this is one of the things that we can look at in terms of, you know, men of color, for example. Now, for us Latinos, we have, especially if we're thinking about like the machismo type of Latino, right? We have promotes positive traits like family protection and those sorts of things, but you're kind of conformed and you're kind of restricted to that type of lifestyle, right? Into that model. You have to kind of conform to that model, and if you don't, then you're going to have that notion that, well, hey, I didn't really do my part. I didn't keep up my end of the bargain, right? Now I'm not kind of fulfilling my traditional role as the man of the house, right? You also have to be the one that makes the rules, lays down the rules, right? And whether you like it or not, you better be employed. You have to have a job. You have to have 2 jobs, right? So you kind of, again, so if we think about the model here, this is the individual that's, you know, they're conformist. They're conforming, right? And if we think about the type of strain, well, they're adapting. It's that dysfunctional strain, right? Same thing here for our Black men. This is not dysfunction. This is more discrepancy because now there's obstacles, and it's really kind of getting in their way of actually achieving that model, right? And so that's kind of problematic. So we can see this is more like discrepancy strain, whereas this is more like dysfunctional strain. So we can kind of layer it out that way. If we think about LGBTQ and trans, right, they're also experiencing problems with strain, right? If we think about it from race, ethnicity, to even gender, because this type of gender is also kind of very dynamic and it's very interwoven because now for a trans person, they have to unravel the gender that they were assigned to at birth and reconstruct what masculinity looks like to them, right? Not only do they have to reconstruct it, they have to kind of be a little bit more vigilant and be hyper kind of critical of what that masculinity looks like, because now they got to pass that off and sell that to the others outside that population, right? Because people don't even buy to begin with that they're of a different gender, right? So they're really trying to set that goal, and not only set that goal, but trying to achieve that goal and demonstrate that goal. So it's a lot more challenging because, again, it's like that discrepancy strain. Are they ever really truly going to be able to achieve those gender norms or that masculinity based off the perceptions of outside onlookers, right? From society's point of view. They have a harder time to actually fulfilling that and conforming to gender norms, right? Not to mention that they also have to be vigilant in terms of their self-expression because of homophobic and transphobic views, right? More likely to be abused, more likely to be attacked in terms of violence, the experience of violence, right? So they have to kind of be aware of their surroundings all the time. They have, they're under constant stress, and they have to worry about their safety as well. So from race, ethnicity, and gender, there's other dynamics. And if we think about sexuality, I put in LGBTQ. So if you think about bisexual men and gay men, for example, a lot of times because people conflate sex, gender, and sexuality, that if somebody is bi or gay, automatically they're perceived to be feminine, or they're perceived to be something else, right? And so they also experience violence and aggression toward them too, just because of their identity, their sexual identity. So there's different layers. Now, the problem with this is like, I've given you one slide for each of these categories, but really each one of these could be a whole topic in and of itself. And so I'm trying to put a gallon of milk into a cup, so some's gonna spill, right? It's not that easy. But there's a lot to talk about, there's a lot to unpack. And as a matter of fact, when I first started out this project, it was a bit overwhelming because there's so much. It's like, what do you pick out that's most important? And so these are some of the things that I was kind of grappling with. But I thought it was important to kind of put that intersectionality into the picture. So one of the things that I came across was this idea, actually, and it actually came up in a conversation with my therapist. I was talking to my therapist about these ideas, and I was telling him what I was thinking about doing for this project. I told him, hey, I got this spot for the 63rd lecture, and I'm thinking about doing something with gender and masculinity. I was kind of giving him ideas. He goes, have you heard of normative male alexithymia? I don't know. I've heard of alexithymia. Now, alexithymia is a clinical diagnosis where somebody cannot recognize, express, articulate emotions. It's like they have an emotional blind spot. Like they don't really understand what kind of emotion, what they're having at that moment, what somebody else's emotions are. They have a very difficult time empathizing with somebody because they don't really understand what that emotion that they're experiencing from another person's point of view, right? And I started looking into the normative male alexithymia, and Joseph Pleck, one of the theorists that I pointed out earlier, he writes on it as well as a psychologist by the name of Ronald Levant. And they write a lot about male alexithymia. So alexithymia is clinical, this is subclinical, meaning this is more of a social construct, or this is more of a social issue, I'm sorry, more of a social issue. So with normative male alexithymia, in other words, we're raised to have this particular issue or this problem, right? It's not a clinical diagnosis, but it is a problem. In other words, it's ingrained in our socialization for boys and for men. We're raised to not showing emotion. We're not supposed to be sad, or you're not supposed to cry. You're not supposed to have any other emotion other than I'm fine and I'm upset, right? That's it. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm fine. What's wrong? I'm fine. What's wrong? I'm fine. Now you're upset, right? It goes straight from one to the next, right? We don't, that's it. That's all we're allowed to have, right? And so for Ronald Levant, what he's basically saying is that because of the socialization process, the way that we're raised as kids, it's ingrained in that process and the way that we teach boys how to be boys. So there are emotional blind spots. And one thing that you can do right now as a little test even to yourselves is think about this. Like, if you had to name off emotions, how many can you name in like a couple of minutes or a minute or so? I guarantee you that for the guys, we'll come up with maybe 3 or 4. The women will have a whole list, right? Even today, I know I've been reading about this, I've been learning about this, and I still struggle to come up with a list of emotions. It's just like, it's hard because again, I've been socialized this way for 55 years almost, right? And so it's not like I'm gonna be able to undo it right away, but I'm aware of it, but it's a challenge. And it's a challenge to be able, and this is why a lot of times it's hard for men to empathize with others. Thank you. It has health consequences. Because you can't express your emotions, because you're not really able to articulate what you're feeling and that sort of thing, you're more likely to be experiencing anxiety and depression. It actually causes other problems. And if you're experiencing anxiety and depression, we don't have coping mechanisms. We can't go talk about it to our friends. I can't just call Tommy, go, Tommy, hey, I got a problem. You want to go talk about my feelings? He's gonna be like, let's go buy a beer instead, right? I don't want to do that, right? So there's a lot of health consequences that come along with this. And then there's like a chain of events that typically takes place. Again, boys learn it from a young age, and it's also socially reinforced, right? Men, and especially from other men. Men please other men, right? So again, if you think about like our experiences as we were younger, I remember when I share this story with the last lecture as well, going on a double date with a friend back in high school, go see Titanic. I tear up. He catches me, right? I run into him 20 years later. He goes, hey, remember that time you were crying like a little girl at the movies? I'm like, they don't ever forget. It's because they're pleasing you. You're getting pleased, right? And so if you wear the wrong shirt, if you're behaving a certain way, other men will put you in check. And even other women. Women will also put you in check. Hey, you need to man up. Kind of that's where that idea comes from, man up, right? So it's culturally reinforced, and we got to pay attention to it. So going back, if we go back to the employment, if we go back to some of the things that I brought up earlier, jobs are disappearing. We know that jobs are kind of going away. And this last administration, they ran on this thing, but we're going to bring jobs back, right? And there's a lot of people upset. There's a lot of people upset that the jobs are gone. We're bringing jobs, we need to bring back those blue collar jobs. And people, they're right to be upset because the jobs are gone, but I think their anger is displaced and they're blaming the wrong people for the job loss. Blaming immigrants, blaming women, blaming people of color, DEI hires. All these people are responsible for the job loss, but they're not really thinking about automation. They're not really thinking about other ways of production, right? We got AI now. We got cars that are driving themselves. We got 3D printing and production, building, right? And we know that for men, production, males make up 70% of that workforce. Transportation, 80% of that workforce. For construction, 90% of that workforce. And those, again, 3D construction, driverless vehicles, and automation. And now we even got AI coming in. So jobs are disappearing, and the skills that were required once before are now kind of going away. The skill sets that we need now are really more in that kind of emotional intelligence skill set, right? You got self-awareness, self-motivation, you got to have empathy, social skills, right? Those are the skill sets that are now required for the types of jobs that we do. Now, Richard Reeves, he's a researcher over at the Brookings Institute. He wrote Boys and Men, and he talks about HEAL jobs, where HEAL jobs are health, education, administration, and literacy type of jobs. These are the jobs that are actually growing. These are the jobs that are actually doing well, but they require emotional intelligence, right? You have to have a certain skill set for these particular jobs. It's not so much the skill sets where you can just go wave a hammer around and be employed, all right? A second ago, I said, our boys aren't coming to school. We also said that they're out of work and they're looking for jobs, yet they lack the skill sets. So there's this thing, we got a problem. And if we were to think about it, and looking at the numbers that Brandon sent me the other day, I was looking at nursing, or 20% of our students, or 20% of our female students are in the nursing program. It was like 3%, 2.5% for boys in the nursing program. Education, early education, boys didn't even show up on that graph. Actually, early education was low even for women. They were like at 3%, but boys weren't even on that list. Social and behavioral sciences, not even on that list. right? So our boys are not showing up for school, they're not getting the skill sets, and we're going, job opportunities aren't there. And of course, we got people saying, oh, it's, the immigrants are taking our jobs. It's other people taking our jobs, it's DEI hires, it's all these other things that are taking our jobs, but at the same time, our boys aren't going to school looking for those jobs because they're lacking that skill set. They're not seeing what jobs are actually available. So in that conversation that I was having with my dad not that long ago, he goes, why don't more boys become school teachers? I go, that's a great question. If you think about it, why don't they become school teachers? Think about it in terms of masculinity. One, because being a school teacher, you can't be a breadwinner. The truth, you can't be a breadwinner. And it's typically associated with pink collar work. Women typically become school teachers, right? And then if men do decide to go work with small children, go work at a preschool or work K through 12 in a first, now everybody's kind of scrutinizing, like, what's wrong with them? Why is he working with little kids? But that's also part of that masculinity and also part of that those gender norms. They kind of reinforce these ideas like, hey, we need to be vigilant. There's something wrong. That's not okay for a man to do, right? In actuality, that's exactly what we need men to do right now. We need more men working with small children, being role models, being mentors. We got a preschool right down that hill that we should be sending some of our students over to mentor those small kids, especially our Latino kids, our Latino males, right? We need those role models out there. So we need to have programs and we need to put more men on the path of what Richard Reeve called heal jobs, right? In the same way that we put women on the path to STEM, right? We're pretty clear and we're pretty particular about how we place women on track to get into STEM. We offer scholarships, we throw money at people, get in the STEM field, get into math and science, but we're not doing the same thing for our boys. So the jobs are there, but if we're thinking about it in terms of status, if we're thinking about it in terms of our ability to be the breadwinner, not gonna happen. But if we were to reshape the way that we think about that, if we were to think about, rather than being the breadwinner, if we could say, hey, you know what, I'll be a contributor to the family. It's all about the reframing. We have to reframe, right? So we got to think about how we could reframe some of these jobs in a way that align with kind of a new definition of masculinity. Oh, and the wage stagnation, men without college degrees saw a wage drop. So when we see that closing gap for men and women's earnings, sometimes people will think, well, women are earning a lot more money. Well, actually, too, the other half of that story is that men are making less, right? Men are actually making less, so that gap is closing, but not in the way that we really want to see it close, okay? Violence, so I came up with these two. I mean, looking for models of violence or case studies of violence was no hard feat at all. I mean, I did a search from the Violence Project, I think it was the Violence Project, and I looked up the last 200 mass shootings. Out of the last 200 mass shootings, I had 196 options to choose from. There was only 4 mass shootings that were done by women out of the last 200. Let that sink in, right? So again, you know, not all men are violent, but most of the violence is done by men. The good news on that, I did read a study though, that it's 1% of the population that commit about 64% of the violent crimes. That's kind of, you know, I don't know if that makes it better. I don't know, but it's just like, you know, sounds better when you kind of put it that way. So anyways, Elliot Rogers, he killed 6 people in a stabbing, right? He killed 3 people before he left the house, stabbed another 3, and he shot another like 12 or something like that. He was upset at women. He felt entitled. There's this idea of entitlement. And this sociologist Mike Kimmel talks about this idea of entitlement. It's when something feels owed to you, right? Not only does it feel owed to you, but you also have a moral obligation to have that, right? There's a moral obligation to have it. And if it's an aggrieved entitlement, now it justifies using violence to get that. So this is a aggrieved entitlement. Michael Kimmel, right, he wrote, his book was Angry White Men, and he has a plethora of examples on what this looks like. But if we think about violence in terms of mass shootings, Harris and Klebold, Columbine, those guys were picked on. They were bullied, right? And if we think mass shootings, there's another way that we should think about mass shootings, not just that they're mass shootings and it's a mass murder, but we also got to think about them in the sense they're also suicides. They're more likely to commit suicide in this process, right? So they're suicides. So Harris and Klebold, they were bullied, they were picked on. They went into the high school and they actively sought out the jocks, the ones that were picking on them, right? Because again, if you think about the status, if you think about their status as a masculine individual, it was like they were taking that away from it, and that was their entitlement to be masculine, right? That was their thing. That was like, I'll show you who's masculine. Not only am I going to show you, I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory in this process, right? And so I have an author in here, and I have the reference, but he wrote an article, Faggots, Firearms, and the Search for Fame. And he writes specifically on how many of the mass shootings that have occurred, that these folks were, one, trying to recruit their masculine identity, and two, make a name for themselves in that process, right? So it's about the status. It's about that status. Earlier, I talked about road rage. Marcus Ariz, you guys probably remember this. This was 2021, right here on the 55 freeway. A woman cuts off this driver, or the driver cuts off this woman. She gives him the bird. He pulls out a Glock 17 and fires at the car, and he kills 6-year-old Aiden in the back seat, right? Because somebody flipped him off. He was disrespect. Somebody owes me respect. And that's what you got to think about. It's like somebody owes you that. That's the perception, is that respect is owed to me. And for guys, the guys in this class, or the guys in this room, growing up, I know, I was like going back to my growing up, I mean, if somebody disrespected you, that was all it took to start a fight. And what did that look like? It could just be somebody looking at you, right? Mad dogging, what are you looking at? When you get a little older, it's like, oh, I'm not doing that. But if you think you have something on your shirt, or it's like, I'm not doing all that. That's like a lot of work. It's like, but it is about respect and how we garner that respect, right? And we feel that it's owed. So in if we think about, for those, again, if we think about the conformance, if we think about those who are those innovators, when somebody disrespects them, so I would definitely call these two innovators, right? Because they use violent means to reinforce their masculinity, right? And in this case here, the prosecutors described Ezra as extreme danger to the community because he couldn't control his anger. He couldn't control his anger. Violent rage, impulse, lack of impulse. And so we know that, again, too, the other I'm going to rewind a little bit, I think. Do I have time? No, I'm going to keep going. Okay. I don't want to, that's what we do. We rewind and go back and forth. And it's like, I'll have you here all day. All right, so Ronald Levant, he talks about kind of breaking the cycle and actually reconstructing masculinity. And so what does that look like? Well, how are we going to redefine masculinity in such a way that it's a healthy way? Yet we still feel masculine, because we've got to understand that masculinity is, it's our identity. And I think this is why, when I first brought this topic up, and actually I remember talking to Cliff about this, we were like, I go, hey, I want to talk about masculinity. We was like, whoa. Careful what you do here. You got to be careful, right? Can't just talk about masculinity because it's like, that's it. And my last discussion, my last lecture last week, my neighbor showed up. He goes, oh man, that was a loaded topic. I'm like, I guess it kind of is, but that means I'm touching on a nerve, right? Masculinity it's really tied to our identities. We don't really think about that. When we're thinking about jobs, and we're thinking about like your jobs, like some people, what does that have to do with masculinity? Well, think about how your identity is linked to what you do, right? When people retire, I was just talking to somebody that's like, well, hey, when you retire, it's a loss of identity. You got to rebuild yourself, right? You got to start all over and kind of adapt something new, because for 20 plus 30 years you were a professor, or you were law enforcement, you were into something else, right? But that was your identity, that was what you did. And if we look at the types of jobs that we did, it's really, again, tied to our gender. We just don't really think about it that way, right? Our statuses, our occupations. So we want to think about how we can do this in a healthy way. So one, I think if we offer emotional courage, like reframing vulnerability as strength, being able to go talk to your therapist and say, I'm not feeling good about myself. I'm feeling like, I'm not in a safe space, or, just being vulnerable, being in the circle. And recently we've been having discussions here in La Casa, and we actually do them in this room right here, where we have pláticas with our men. And it's been great because it's a brave space. It's not a safe space. Safe space don't exist. Everybody's got wounds and scars. But we can create a brave space where we can kind of open up and have some conversations and we can actually be vulnerable. And I've seen our students actually do that. And Israel knows better than anybody else. We've all been in here and we like, this is a good feeling. It's like, and it's a welcoming feeling, right? And it's nice. But we don't have those spaces that often. And we need those sorts of spaces where we can be vulnerable and actually say, that's actually part of our masculinity, right? Because that's where strength really is. Being able to put yourself out there and actually say, hey, I can be this way, I can be vulnerable and still be okay, right? That's strength. Building authentic relationships, connections. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, on average, most adults had about 8 to 9 close friends. Today, it's like 4 or 5 close friends. So our social circles are actually shrinking. Those are kind of going away. And we think we're more connected through social media, but we're not, right? It's actually even more problematic than more. Jonathan Haidt, he wrote, actually him and also Philip Zimbardo and their books that I read on Boys and Men. Both of them look at online platforms like, online gaming, online gambling, pornography, social media as being this big old problem because it creates more depression in young adults, right? It's really creating a lot more problems than actually helping out. So if we're thinking that we're more connected because we have a greater number of friends on our social media, that's not necessarily the case. Do we have those meaningful relationships, those connections, where we can actually go out and have a conversation, where we can actually be vulnerable with one another, right? And and again, we kind of think of this as in the funny terms, like for the guys, like, hey, do you have a bromance, right? And we think about a bromance, and it's kind of got this negative connotation, but really that's what we need, right? We need to have somebody out there where we can connect on that kind of level, right? Adaptive strength, preserving the positive. So earlier I said, innovators are the hypermasculine and toxic masculinities. And I use that word, but I just because I have to describe it in a way, shape, or form because I got to give you something, right? But I really hate that term toxic masculinity. It's like throwing the baby out with bathwater, right? Because if you think about masculinity, again, that's part of our identity. If we say it's toxic, now we're saying there's something wrong with you. It pathologizes masculinity, right? Rather than saying, hey, you know what? There's good qualities about being men, being strong, being a protector, determination, those are great, but we don't like the aggression. We don't like the violence. We want to get rid of that. So if we were to name the behavior, get rid of the behavior, and keep everything else, that's the way that we can reconstruct it, right? But I think using terms like toxic masculinity, hypermasculinity, I don't think it does us any favors. I think it's actually more harmful than anything else. Again, because if we think about language in and of itself, it's got our culture kind of woven, our values woven through it, right? And so when we use language like that, it kind of reinforces that, hey, there's something problematic with masculinity in general. And I don't think that's the right way to think. And then also an ethical framework, defining manhood through character and compassion. So we need to think of different qualities and different characteristics that we can say, hey, this is what makes up a man. And an exercise that you can do if you were to think about this, like, when I get into my class, if I ask my students, I go, what makes a man, I get a list of traits and qualities and protection, aggression, confident, and all these kind of qualities and characteristics. But if I were to say, what makes a man a good man, you get a different list. That's the list that we want. Take that list and replace the other list, right? That's what we want to do. So, all right. If we were to just make these small adjustments, only they're actually really big. And there's a lot more things that we can look at. I mean, there's other things out there that are impacting masculinity. And I was thinking about Kirsten earlier. It's like, it was capitalism all along, right? It's like, that's one of the things that comes to mind, right? Capitalism, and it's like materialism and all these other things. But if we were to really improve our emotional intelligence, then we would have better emotional regulation. We would actually enhance our psychological resilience. We would feel better about ourselves, less likely to be depressed, anxious, less likely to use drugs, alcohol, have unhealthy coping mechanisms and other behaviors. We can disrupt violence and aggression by fostering empathy, right? Because we need empathy as part of that self-awareness, right? Prevent emotional escalation, reduce conflict, healthier conflict resolutions, if we were to think about our economic resilience, emotional skills support adaptation to economic strain, better job readiness, better coping and with unemployment and transitions, right? So those are the things that we could probably look at in addressing some of these other issues. So it's there. It's just like, all we got to do is reframe a little bit, change the way we talk, teach our kids at a young age about emotional intelligence, right? Not at 55, where I'm having to go through it now. It's like, damn. So, so going back to my story, if I were to think about my story, I go to Hulu, I was upset and angry. Well, no wonder. I was raised to be that way. I was raised, I was handicapped. I came into the game handicapped, right? And so it was interesting because last week I had one of the audience members, they asked me, so, hey, you kind of understand this now. Now where are you at on this? Are you at that level of the rebel, right? I go, evolutionist. I go, no, I'm trying to unwind 54 years of this shit. I'm still going to do the same way, but I can get better at it, but it's not an easy transition. So being aware of it. All right, so emotional intelligence, develop skills, identify, express feelings. You got to have community support, right? You got to create spaces where men can be vulnerable without judgment. We got to teach emotional literacy from a young age and redefine masculinity. I think we also need to develop our individual growth, emotional awareness, practice being vulnerable, build our communities, create a support network, friends, family, close people that you're close to, and also advocate for social change, policies. What can we do different? How can we support, like here on our campus, if we think we're in education, so how can we support our male students, our male students of color, right? We have PERC, we've done a lot of work with our men of color. How can we use this information to actually improve what they're experiencing here on campus, where they can feel safe and come to us and ask for help. One of the biggest problems I see in my own class, I'm sure you all see this as well, is men don't like to ask for help. You're struggling with your work, I'm asking you, hey, who needs help? Who needs help? They've been conditioned to not ask for help. You got to solve this on your own, right? So we need to change that kind of a narrative. Question and answers.
Woo, 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 woo.
Was good, okay.
As they.
You're right. So before we do the closing remarks, we have time for just a few questions before we start the reception. Okay, I see one right here.
It's more of a comment. I didn't realize how this lecture would take me back to 2007, but it did. And my journey in understanding masculinity came from a tragedy when my sister was shot and murdered 2007 in front of the church. Her husband, Matthew, we all grew up together. And if anyone told me that Matthew would come to the church and shoot my sister, I would have said, absolutely no way.
Wow.
But I had to understand it instead of hate. I had to understand it from a structural level. And that's why the structural strength theory means so much to me, because it gave me an answer to try to start eroding this idea that's embedded in masculinity. And I had to understand that, she made a decision to leave him, from being abusive and from cheating on her. And I help her make that decision. And I feel very guilty sometimes about that decision to say, you have to, walk away. And because she walked away, he came to the church and he shot her. She changed everything about her life except where she went to church. And so it was in understanding masculinity and understanding, the parts of it that are not healthy that has helped me when I teach gender, when I teach marriage and family, even when I teach in the prison, and how men respond, to a different understanding, a kind of resocialization of their masculinity in a different way that we haven't confronted in our society on a structural level, and we need to do that. So this is so, just touched my heart, and I appreciate that. And, I teach and honor my sister Tanya Hill, this piece of masculinity that you talk about, but not such on a deep level. You just gave me so much information to use. I just thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
While I do agree with the idea that men need to learn more empathy and more emotional intelligence, I do feel it should be in service to changing the way our modern capitalist society is kind of functioning. Because while you did bring it up briefly, I do feel it has quite a large impact with regards to how masculine men or masculine presenting people like interact with the world, in the sense that given like the fact that federal minimum wage hasn't increased in the past like 10, 15 years, job opportunities, even if they are present, they won't allow people to actually experience life beyond mere survival.
No,
Along with the fact that tuition isn't guaranteed. Financial aid is an option, but it is an option that comes with certain restrictions, certain conditions that must be met. With like, if say just college in general, and healthcare for that matter, were subsidized by the government and weren't just kind of hoarded by certain people in power, that would allow not just men, but anyone in society to actually experience a life that gives them that opportunity to exercise that emotional intelligence, or, those skill sets that would allow them to be more empathetic, and without, focusing on their own survival, given that they can't afford to, you know, extend that kind of protection, or extend that opportunity to other people around them, along with the lots of like third spaces such as parks, malls, and all that stuff, because of capitalist leaders, I guess, finding a way to maximize profit while minimizing gain, and sort of just shutting down businesses, shutting down anything that isn't making the money, or in some cases sending off jobs to other countries because it's cheaper, instead of allowing those opportunities to stay within the community, for example.
yeah, no, I agree. It's capitalism all along. I like that thing. We could have talked about social class. Social class, if we think about even core American values, how do we differ from other countries? If we were to think about like gun violence, we're off the chart, man. Like, we're not doing so well in that particular area. It's like, so what's so different about us compared to other places? And again, if you look at our core American values, and if it's rooted in capitalism and these sorts of things, where profit's more meaningful than lives, right? So, there's a lot more to discuss here. This is just, I have, had an hour. I have an hour, and it's like, I gotta get this done. It's like, yeah, so, we can go on for weeks for this type of a topic. Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to take these last 3 questions, and then we can ask you more questions when we're having food and fellowship.
My question is, I see a lot of young men reverting back to the church and following going back to the Republican Party. And I think those kind of structures are kind of going against the greater good. Not so much the church, but I think the church is, they follow such a way of misogynistic values. And a lot of young men tend to follow those types of values because it uplifts them in their masculinity. So I think my question is, like, why are a lot of young men now reverting to that? And like, why should men start changing, or like care about the greater good, or like for the people?
I think what you're seeing and what you're experiencing is that there's a lot of men out there that are looking for some sort of like community, right? Because again, the loss of jobs, it's a lot more challenging to go out there and get gainful employment. Can't buy a house like, you could, 30, 40 years ago, in the way that, like when I was 25, I was able to buy a house at 25 years old. My kids are getting close to 30, and I'm sure housing here is not where it needs to be for them to get a house, right? And so they're frustrated. So they're looking for community, but they find themselves in these spaces that they're in the manosphere. And they're listening to the Rush Limbaughs of the world, and they're in these podcasts. And again, there's a lot of blaming going on and finger pointing, but I think it's misdirected and it's misinformed. And again, so I think, and this is why it's really critical. And we've talked about this with our Platicas, for example. When we're building that space for our student, I want to make sure it's a space that's going to be a healthy space that allows them expression and vulnerability. I don't want it to become a space where it becomes a boys club, right? Where it's going to be counterproductive. So if you're looking for community, you can find it, but you got to look for the right kind of community, right? So I mean, it's easy to get caught up in another space where maybe some of that stuff does resonate with them, and now they're being told something that might be counterproductive.
So my question is regarding the machismo and the Latino masculinity. The question is usually about my dad. He's an old, very machista, and what stood out to me was the emotional suppression. So how do you go about changing one's mindset, especially when they've grown up to have such emotional depression where we can't even ask about it, and I guess? Because he went through a stint where he didn't talk to my mom for a couple months, and turned out they wanted to get divorced, and he actually left. And it took him to leave to realize his mistakes. And when we finally sat down and talked to him, we asked him, well, why didn't you talk to us? And he was like, ¿pa qué? For what? It's it's my stuff. I got to deal with it, and you guys don't have to worry about it. So how do we kind of change that old school machista mindset to kind of go to the future of masculinity of opening up, especially with your family, your own kids?
That's a tough one, because the truth of it is, I don't know. How do you change? Again, you're looking at somebody who's, 55, 65 years old. This is what they know. Now you're asking them all of a sudden to be a different person, right? It's like, how do you become this different person at the drop of a dime? It's like, you can't. You can get better at it, but it's self-awareness. I think it's like, with drugs and alcohol. The first step is recognizing you have a problem, right? We have to acknowledge that there's something wrong before we could actually, try to figure out how we can fix ourselves. And I'm not saying that there's something wrong with this. And that's maybe a poor choice of words, because there's nothing wrong with this, but we've been conditioned in a way that we have unhealthy outcomes. And I think that's kind of a better way of saying it. But truth of it is, you got to start with the kids now, so we can start making that change for later. Not that we can't make other changes, but it's just having a dialogue, having a conversation, providing that space.
And then after that, he starts saying, I love you. It was a whisper and it got bigger and bigger, but I just really heard what I needed back from me. So maybe if you can mirror it, what you need back.
Push the conversation. Not push it in a way that's, that it's intrusive, but, just offer the space. Offer the space. Hey.
Can we get one round of applause, rousing round of applause for Dr. Perez? On behalf of the President's leadership team and a member of this elite society of distinguished faculty lecturers, I just want to again say thank you. I would encourage, there's so much food for thought in this presentation. I would encourage you, especially you students, to really sit with some of this and write down all the questions that came to mind, because there's so much. And as you said, this could be a year-long seminar, not a bad idea. Uh, So much to unpack. And I'm just going to ask one question. You don't really have to answer it, but I just want you to think about it as well. So many questions came to my mind, but one of the things I'm interested in too is how women and girls are also socialized into masculinity, and how we either uphold some of all of these different frameworks you're talking about or not. So that's just like, that was what was just going off in my mind.
Ingrained in our values and our traditional, it's like,
Exactly.
it feels comfortable.
It feels comfortable. And then again, the layers of race and class that are associated with it and all of the intersectionality. So again, thank you, everyone. Fabulous. Thank you, Dr. Perez. And I'd like to welcome Joe Scott Cole to the front. Also another member of this Society of Distinguished Faculty Lecturers.
Okay.
Did you like it?
Okay, so on behalf of the RCC community and the RCC Faculty Senate. Okay, gotcha.
Everybody
The
should.
stage. We want to present you with a small token
you.
of our respect and celebration. And we want you to open it now? Okay,
It feels like a 32 ounce.
it is. Say one small thing. Okay, yes.
So I just want to say that the tradition has always been to give our distinguished faculty lecturer a nice crystal clock and oversized photo of themselves that's life-size. And we went this year for something that we think fits his personality, which is first,
God.
a good marketing item. This is a marketing item, not a gift. It has a small engraving that says Dr. Eddie Perez, 63rd Distinguished Faculty Lecturer.
There we go.
It's real leather, because we don't do pleather. And then,
Even smells, Bill.
I know.
There we go. There we go. I know, wait a minute.
Wait a minute. Okay. I don't have my glasses.
you gotta
What am I looking at?
open.
Okay, here, let me hold this.
Y'all can smell the leather after.
Here's it.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, you gotta open it up.
Ah. Wow. Pin set.
Yeah.
It's.
Okay, I'll be bad.
Okay.
It is a nice custom wood pin set that says, again, another marketing item, 63rd Distinguished Faculty Lecturer. It, with his name on it, Dr. Eddie Perez.
Cool.
And then this card is from some people that love you. You could read it later. And now you.
Okay. All right, so with that, should we pose?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
should pose. Okay, we still have to move further. Oh, we're still in that.
Oh.
Out of the light. Out of the light.
Oh, we're out of the light.
Walk into the light, walk away from the light. Okay. All right, and with that, we just want to invite everyone to enjoy our reception. So thank you all for being here today,
Francis,
and
it's-
congratulations again, Dr. Perez.
Comes from the other photographer.
Inside.
Yes, so.